The Ancien Régime was the monarchic, aristocratic, social and political system established in the Kingdom of France from approximately the 15th century until the later 18th century under the late Valois and Bourbon dynasties. The term is occasionally used to refer to the similar feudal social and political order of the time elsewhere in Europe. The administrative and social structures of the Ancien Régime were the result of years of state-building, legislative acts, internal conflicts and civil wars. But they remained a confusing patchwork of local privilege and historic differences until the French Revolution ended the system. Much of the medieval political centralization of France had been lost in the Hundred Years' War, and the Valois dynasty's attempts at re-establishing control over the scattered political centers of the country were hindered by the wars of religion. Much of the reigns of Henry IV, Louis XIII and the early years of Louis XIV were focused on administrative centralization. Despite, however, the notion of absolute monarchy, and the efforts by the kings to create a centralized state, Ancien Régime France remained a country of systemic irregularities. Administrative, legal, judicial, and ecclesiastic divisions and prerogatives frequently overlapped, while the French nobility struggled to maintain their own rights in the matters of local government and justice. And powerful internal conflicts protested against this centralization. The need for centralization in this period was directly linked to the question of royal finances and the ability to wage war. The internal conflicts and dynastic crises of the 16th and 17th centuries and the territorial expansion of France in the 17th century demanded great sums which needed to be raised through taxes, such as the tie and the gabelle, and by contributions of men in service from the nobility. One key to this centralization was the replacing of personal clientele systems organized around the king and other nobles by institutional systems around the state. The creation of the intendants, representatives of royal power in the provinces, did much to undermine local control by regional nobles. The same was true of the greater reliance shown by the royal court on their noblesse de robe as judges and royal councillors. The creation of regional parliaments had initially the same goal of facilitating the introduction of royal power into newly assimilated territories. But as the parliaments gained in self-assurance, they began to be sources of disunity. Terminology. The term in French means «old régime» or «former régime». However, most English-language books use the French term «Ancien Régime». The term first appeared in print in English in 1794, and was originally pejorative in nature. Simon Schama has observed, virtually as soon as the term was coined, «old régime» was automatically freighted with associations of both traditionalism and senescence. It conjured up a society so encrusted with anachronisms that only a shock of great violence could free the living organism within. Institutionally torpid, economically immobile, culturally atrophied and socially stratified, this «old régime» was incapable of self-modernization. More generally, Ancien Régime refers to any political and social system having the principal features of the French Ancien Régime. Europe's other ancient régimes had similar origins, but diverse fates. Some eventually evolved into constitutional monarchies, whereas others were torn down by wars and revolutions, provinces and administrative divisions. Territorial expansion. In the mid-15th century, France was significantly smaller than it is today, and numerous border provinces were either autonomous or belonged to the Holy Roman Empire, the Crown of Aragon or the Kingdom of Navarre. There were also foreign enclaves, like the Comté Venaissin. In addition, certain provinces within France were ostensibly personal fiefs of noble families. From the late 15th century up to the late 17th century, France underwent a massive territorial expansion and an attempt to better integrate its provinces into an administrative whole. French acquisitions from 1461 to 1768. Under Louis XI, Provence, Dauphiné. Under Louis XII, Milan, Naples. Under Francis I, Brittany. Under Henry II, de facto, Trois-Rives, Calais. Under Henry IV, County of Foix. Under Louis XIII, Béarn and Navarre. Under Louis XIV, Treaty of Westphalia, Alsace and de Jure, Trois-Rives, Treaty of the Pyrenees, Artois. Northern Catalonia, Treaty of Nijmegen, Franche-Comté, Flanders. Under Louis XV, Lorraine, Corsica. Administration. Despite efforts by the kings to create a centralized state out of these provinces, France in this period remained a patchwork of local privileges and historical differences. The arbitrary power of the monarch was in fact much limited by historic and regional particularities. Administrative, legal, judicial, and ecclesiastic divisions and prerogatives frequently overlapped. Certain provinces and cities had won special privileges. The south of France was governed by written law adapted from the Roman legal system, the north of France by common law. The representative of the king in his provinces and cities was the governor, royal officers chosen from the highest nobility. Provincial and city governors were predominantly military positions in charge of defense and policing. Provincial governors, also called lieutenants généraux, also had the ability of convoking provincial parliaments, provincial estates and municipal bodies. The title, governor, first appeared under Charles VI. The Ordinance of Blois of 1579 reduced their number to 12, and an ordinance of 1779 increased their number to 39. Although in principle they were the king's representatives and the charges could be revoked at the king's will, some governors had installed themselves and their heirs as a provincial dynasty. The governors were at the height of their power from the middle of the 16th to the mid-17th century. Their role in provincial unrest during the civil wars led Cardinal Richelieu to create the more tractable positions of intendants of finance, policing and justice, and in the 18th century the role of provincial governors was greatly curtailed. In an attempt to reform the system, new divisions were created. The Resits générales, commonly known as généralités, were initially only taxation districts. The first 16 were created in 1542 by edict of Henry II. Their role steadily increased and by the mid-17th century, the généralités were under the authority of an intendant, and they became a vehicle for the expansion of royal power in matters of justice, taxation and policing. By the Revolution, there were 36 généralités. The last two were created in 1784. State finances. The desire for more efficient tax collection was one of the major causes for French administrative and royal centralization in the early modern period. The taille became a major source of royal income. Exempted from the taille were clergy and nobles, officers of the crown, military personnel, magistrates, university professors and students, and certain cities such as Paris. The provinces were of three sorts: the pays d'élection, the pays d'équité, and the pays d'imposition. In the pays d'élection, the assessment and collection of taxes were trusted to elected officials, and the tax was generally personal, meaning it was attached to non-noble individuals. In the pays d'équité, Brittany, Languedoc, Burgundy, Auvergne, Béarn, Dauphiné, Provence and portions of Gascony, such as Bigorre, Comminges and the Quatre Valais, recently acquired provinces which had been able to maintain a certain local autonomy in terms of taxation. The assessment of the tax was established by local councils and the tax was generally real, meaning that it was attached to non-noble lands. Pays d'imposition were recently conquered lands which had their own local historical institutions. Although taxation was overseen by the royal intendant, taxation history. Taxation districts had gone through a variety of mutations from the 14th century on. Before the 14th century, oversight of the collection of royal taxes fell generally to the Balis and Sénéchaux in their circumscriptions. Reforms in the 14th and 15th centuries saw France's royal financial administration run by two financial boards which worked in a collegial manner. The four Généraux des Finances oversaw the collection of taxes by tax-collecting agents, and the four Trésoriers de France oversaw revenues from royal lands. Together they were the Messieurs des Finances. The four members of each board were divided by geographical circumscriptions. The areas were named Languedoc, Languedoc, Outre-Seine and Yonne, and Normandy, with the directors of the Languedoc region typically having an honorific preeminence. By 1484, the number of généralités had increased to 6. In the 16th century, the kings of France, in an effort to exert more direct control over royal finances and to circumvent the double board, instituted numerous administrative reforms, including the restructuring of the financial administration and an increase in the number of généralités. In 1542, Henry II, France was divided into 16 généralités. The number increased to 21 at the end of the 16th century, and to 36 at the time of the French Revolution. The last two were created in 1784. The administration of the Généralités of the Renaissance went through a variety of reforms. In 1577, Henry III established 5 treasurers in each Généralité who formed a Bureau of Finances. In the 17th century, oversight of the Généralités was subsumed by the intendants of finance, justice and police, and the expression «généralité» and «intendants» became roughly synonymous. Until the late 17th century, tax collectors were called receveurs. In 1680, the system of the Ferme Générale was established, a franchised customs and excise operation in which individuals bought the right to collect the taille on behalf of the king. Through 6 years' adjudications, the major tax collectors in that system were known as the fermiers généraux. The taille was only one of a number of taxes. There also existed the taille, a national salt tax, national tariffs on various products, local tariffs on specialty products or levied on products entering the city or sold at fairs, and local taxes. Finally, the Church benefited from a mandatory tax or tithe called the dime. Louis XIV created several additional tax systems, including the capitation, which touched every person including nobles and the clergy, and the décime, enacted to support the military, which was a true tax on income and on property value. In 1749, under Louis XV, a new tax based on the décime, the vingtième, was enacted to reduce the royal deficit. And this tax continued through the remaining years of the Ancien Régime. Fees for holding state positions. Another key source of state financing was through charging fees for state positions. Many of these fees were quite elevated, but some of these offices conferred nobility and could be financially advantageous. The use of officers to seek profit had become standard practice as early as the 12th and 13th centuries. A law in 1467 made these offices irrevocable, except through the death, resignation or forfeiture of the title holder, and these officers, once bought, tended to become hereditary charges passed on within families. In an effort to increase revenues, the state often turned to the creation of new offices. Before it was made illegal in 1521, it had been possible to leave open-ended the date that the transfer of title was to take effect. In 1534, the 40 days rule was instituted, which made the successor's right void if the preceding office holder died within 40 days of the transfer and the office returned to the state. However, a new fee, called the survivance joasante, protected against the 40 days rule. In 1604, Sully created a new tax, the paulette, or annual tax, which permitted the title holder to be free of the 40-day rule. The paulette and the venality of offices became key concerns in the parliamentarian revolts of the 1640s. The state also demanded of the church a free gift. which the Church collected from holders of ecclesiastic offices through taxes called the Cime. State finances also relied heavily on borrowing, both private and public. The most important public source for borrowing was through the system of rentes sur Hôtel de Ville of Paris, a kind of government bond system offering investors annual interest. This system first came to use in 1522 under Francis I. Until 1661, the head of the financial system in France was generally the Surintendant des Finances. In that year, the Surintendant Nicolas Fouquet fell from power and the position was replaced by the less powerful Contrôleur Général des Finances.